She was just the cleaning lady until the Mafia boss caught her dancing alone. Elvie thought she was invisible. As a night shift cleaner in the most dangerous building in New York, her only goal was to finish her job and pay for her mother's hospital bills. But one night, thinking she was alone in the penthouse, she made a mistake. She took off her boots and danced. She didn't know he was watching. Jax Blackwood, the ruthless owner of the city's underworld, never lets anything go. When he sees Ivy's raw talent and her desperation, he doesn't fire her. He buys her debt. Now Ivy is no longer just a cleaner. She belongs to a man who has enemies around every corner. Trapped in his gilded cage, she must decide, is Jax a monster who wants to own her, or the only shield she has against a war that is about to explode? This isn't just a romance. It's a story of survival, power, and a love that blooms in the middle of a battlefield. Witness the moment the ghost meets the wolf. Wait, before you step into the Blackwood Tower, are you ready for this addiction? If you love intense romance, dangerous secrets, and stories that keep you awake at night, make sure to... And I have a question for you. Where in the world are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. I love seeing how far our Mafia family extends. Now, turn off the lights. The story begins. The silence on the 40th floor wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It pressed against the eardrums, thick with the scent of stale cigar smoke, spilled champagne, and the metallic tang of secrets. Ivy stopped the yellow cleaning cart at the threshold of the double-glass doors. The wheels squeaked, a sharp piercing screech that echoed through the cavernous room like a scream in a cathedral. She winced, freezing in place, her knuckles turning white around the plastic handle. She waited. 1 second. 2. Nothing. Just the low, rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning, blowing a polar wind across the room. The party was over. The sharks had returned to their waters, leaving behind a wreckage of crystal glasses and moral decay. Ivy exhaled, a long, shaky breath that misted in the cold air. She stepped inside. Her oversized gray jumpsuit swished softly with each step, a shapeless fabric designed to make her invisible. It worked. To the people who own this city, she wasn't a woman. She was part of the furniture, a ghost with a mop. Just this floor, she told herself, the thought repeating like a mantra in her tired mind. Finish this floor, get the voucher, buy the medicine. Don't think. Just clean. She bent down to pick up a shattered whiskey tumbler. A shard of glass bit into her glove, but she didn't flinch. Pain was familiar. Pain was loud and it kept her awake. Her eyes drifted to the panoramic window. New York City lay spread out below, a grid of electric veins pulsing in the rain. It looked beautiful from up here. Expensive. Untouchable. Down where she lived, the city didn't shine. It leaked. It smelled of mildew and desperation. She needed to drown it out. Ivy reached into her deep pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen was a spider web of cracks held together by hope. She plugged in her wired earphones. One side was muted with tape, and pressed play. She didn't choose something cheerful. She never did. The bass of Wicked Game, a slow, heavy, instrumental remix, began to thump against her temples. Ba-dum, ba-dum. She gripped the mop, intending to scrub a red wine stain from the white Italian marble. But the rhythm caught her. It hooked into her ribcage and pulled. Her grip loosened. The mop handle clicked as it hit the floor, forgotten. She looked around. The room was vast, shadowed, and empty. You are alone, the lie whispered to her. For 5 minutes, you don't have to be the janitor. You don't have to be the daughter with the sick mother. You can just be. Ivy kicked off her heavy work boots. The smell of leather and rubber faded, replaced by the biting cold of the stone against her feet. She wore thick wool socks, worn thin at the heels, a hole exposing her big toe on the left foot. She didn't care. She closed her eyes, and she let the monster out. It wasn't a pretty dance. It wasn't the delicate ballet she had trained for before life broke her bank account. This was contemporary. This was raw. She threw her head back, her neck creating a long, pale arch in the dim light. She spun, her arms slashed through the air, fighting invisible enemies. She dropped to her knees, the impact jarring her bones, but she used the momentum to slide across the polished floor, her body fluid, like water, like mercury. She was expressing everything she couldn't say: the anger of poverty, the fear of the hospital bills, the loneliness that felt like a physical weight in her chest. She twisted, rose, and leaped. A grand jeté that wasn't perfect, but was powerful enough to tear the air. For a moment, she wasn't Ivy the cleaner. She was a queen of ashes, high above the mezzanine shadows. Click, cling. The silver coin flipped into the air, catching a stray beam of moonlight, before landing back in Jax's palm. He repeated the motion. Click, cling. It was the only thing keeping him from putting a bullet in the wall. Insomnia was a cruel mistress. It scraped the inside of his skull with sandpaper. He hadn't slept in 36 hours. The meeting with the cartel representatives had ended 2 hours ago, but the adrenaline was still sour in his blood. He sat in the high-backed leather chair in the darkened viewing gallery, overlooking the main hall. He was supposed to be reviewing the shipping manifests for the chaotic mess at the docks. Instead, he was watching a ghost. When she had first walked in, pushing that cart, Jax hadn't blinked. He didn't care about the cleaning staff. They were ants. Necessary, nameless, faceless ants. But then she had dropped the mop. He had leaned forward then, the leather of his expensive shoe creaking softly against the floor. He watched her take off her boots. He saw the hesitation. And then, he saw the explosion. Jax brought the glass of scotch to his lips but didn't drink. The amber liquid trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a sudden, violent curiosity. She moved like she was bleeding. That was the only way he could describe it. Most women he knew moved to seduce, to pose, to calculate. This girl? She was moving to survive. He watched her spin, her oversized gray uniform billowing out, revealing glimpses of a body that was too thin, too fragile. But the strength in her legs, the way she held her chin high, defying the empty room, it stirred something dormant in the blackened pit of his chest. He saw her face contort in the shadows. It wasn't a smile. It was a grimace of beautiful agony. She looked like he felt. Trapped. Angry. Desperate. Who are you? The thought was intrusive. Sharp. He saw the hole in her sock. A sudden irrational spike of anger flared in his gut. Why did she have holes in her socks? Why was she cleaning his floor at 3 a.m. with the grace of a dying swan? The music in her ears must have reached a crescendo. She threw herself into a final spin, faster, reckless. She stopped abruptly, chest heaving, her hair escaping its messy bun to cling to her sweaty neck. She stood there, vibrating with energy, alone in the center of his empire. And then, as if feeling the weight of his gaze, heavy, physical, suffocating, she froze. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, she lifted her head. She looked up, past the chandelier, past the railing, straight into the darkness where he sat. She couldn't see him. The glass was one way. The shadows were his friends. But her eyes, wide, dark, terrified doe eyes, they locked onto his position with unsettling precision. She knew. Jax felt a shiver run down his spine. It was the first thing he had felt in years that wasn't rage or indifference. He set the glass down. It made a dull thud on the wooden table. He stood up. He was a large man. He took up space. When he walked to the railing, he felt the floor vibrate under his power. He stepped into the sliver of light coming from the emergency exit sign. Down below, he saw her gasp. She stumbled back, her heel catching on the discarded mop. She flailed, catching herself on the cart, knocking over a spray bottle. Clatter. The sound broke the spell. But Jax didn't let her look away. He stared down at her, his hands gripping the railing, his knuckles white. Heart attack. That was what this was. Her heart had simply exploded. She stared up at the mezzanine. A figure had detached itself from the shadows. He was huge. Even from this distance, he was terrifying. Broad shoulders encased in a black dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms that looked like they could snap her neck with zero effort. He was looking at her. Not just looking. Devouring. Ivy ripped the earphones out of her ears. The silence crashed back in, deafening. Her breath hitched in her throat, burning like acid. She scrambled for her boots, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't grip the leather. I'm sorry, she stammered, her voice cracking. It sounded pathetic in the large room. I thought everyone had left. I didn't mean to. She expected him to yell, to call security, to fire her on the spot. Instead, silence. He just watched her struggle with her boots. Then, a voice drifted down. It wasn't loud. It was deep, dark, and smooth like velvet wrapped around a knife. Don't put them back on. Ivy froze, one boot half on. She looked up, squinting against the dim light. Sir? The shoes, the man said. He leaned over the railing. Leave them off. You ruin the silence with them. Ivy's pulse hammered against her throat. Run, her instinct screamed. This is a predator. This is not a boss. This is a wolf. But her feet wouldn't move. I have to finish cleaning, she whispered, tears of humiliation pricking her eyes. She felt naked, exposed. He had seen her. He had seen the one thing she kept for herself. What is your name? The question was a command. She swallowed hard. Ivy. Sir. Ivy. He tasted the word. It sounded dangerous coming from his mouth. He turned away from the railing, and for a second, she thought he was leaving. She thought she was safe. Then she heard the heavy thud of footsteps on the stairs. He was coming down. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She grabbed her cart. She didn't care about the mop. She didn't care about the job. She needed to get to the elevator. She turned the cart around, the wheels screeching again. But before she could take 2 steps, a shadow engulfed her. He was there. He moved silently, impossibly fast for a man of his size. One moment he was on the stairs, the next he was blocking her path to the exit. Jax Blackwood. She knew his face from the newspapers she used to clean windows. The real estate tycoon. The man the police could never quite pin anything on. Up close, he was devastating. Cruel mouth, jaw clenched tight, eyes that were so dark they looked like abysses. He smelled of expensive whiskey and danger. Ivy backed up until her hips hit the cleaning cart. Trapped. Jax took a step closer. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. His presence was a physical weight, pressing against her skin. He looked down at her feet, at the hole in her sock. Then, his gaze traveled up her legs, over the baggy jumpsuit, stopping at her face. He studied her flushed cheeks, her messy hair, her terrified eyes. You have a debt, Ivy, he murmured. I didn't break anything, she pleaded, hugging herself. I swear, I just danced. I didn't. You stole my attention? He cut her off. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating in her chest. And my attention is very expensive. He reached out. Ivy flinched, closing her eyes, expecting a blow, but she felt only a puff of air near her ear as he leaned in close. Too close. Clean the mess, he whispered. His breath was warm, a shocking contrast to the ice in his tone. And be here tomorrow night. Same time. My shift ends at... I don't care about your shift. He pulled back, his eyes locking onto hers again. You belong to this room now. Don't make me hunt you down, Ivy. Because I will find you. And I don't play fair. He turned and walked away, heading toward the private elevator. He didn't look back. Ivy stood trembling in the middle of the empty hall, the ghost of his scent lingering on her skin, the echo of his threat ringing in her ears. She looked down at her hand. She was shaking so hard she could barely breathe. She knew, with a sinking, terrible certainty, that her life as an invisible ghost was over. She had just been seen by the devil, and he liked what he saw. The morning sun didn't look like hope. It looked like an accusation. Ivy sat on the plastic seat of the subway train, her knees pulled tight against her chest. The car rattled and screeched, smelling of damp wool and too many bodies pressed together. It was a world away from the silent, frozen kingdom of the Blackwood Tower. But she could still feel the cold on her skin. She rubbed her arms, trying to erase the ghost of his breath against her ear. "Don't make me hunt you down." The words looped in her mind, louder than the subway announcements. He was a billionaire, a shark, a man whose name was whispered in fear by the toughest guys in her neighborhood. Why would he care about a cleaner who danced in the dark? It didn't matter. She wasn't going back. She would find another job. She would scrub toilets in a dive bar in Queens if she had to. Anything was safer than being the obsession of a man who looked at her like she was a puzzle he wanted to break apart to solve. The train hissed to a stop at 42nd Street. Ivy stepped out into the gray slush of the New York streets. She pulled her thin coat tighter. Her destination wasn't home. It was the Spotless Solutions Agency headquarters. She was going to quit. The office was a small, cramped room that smelled of bleach and lemon polish. Mr. Henderson, her manager, was usually yelling into a phone, feet up on the desk. Today, he was standing. He was sweating. When Ivy walked in, the silence that fell over the room was heavy. The secretary stopped typing. Mr. Henderson wiped his forehead with a handkerchief that was already soaked. "Ivy," he said. His voice was too high, too nervous. "You're early. I'm here to resign, Mr. Henderson." Ivy kept her voice steady, though her hands were shaking in her pockets. I can't work the night shift at the tower anymore. It's too far." She expected him to argue. She expected him to dock her pay. Instead, Henderson let out a strange, choked laugh. He looked terrified. "Resign? You can't resign, Ivy." "I can. I am." "No, you don't understand." Henderson walked around the desk. He held out a piece of paper. His hand was trembling so much the paper rattled. We sold your contract." Ivy frowned. She took a step back. "Sold it? To who?" "To him." The word hung in the air like smoke. Henderson pointed to the window. "Look outside." Ivy turned slowly. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Through the dirty glass of the office window, she saw it. Parked right in front of the building, in a no-parking zone, was a black SUV. It wasn't just a car. It was a tank wrapped in sleek midnight blue armor. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like voids. 2 men in suits stood by the doors. They weren't looking around. They were looking at the door of the agency. Waiting. "He's waiting for you," Henderson whispered, sinking back into his chair as if his legs had given out. "He bought the contract, Ivy. He bought the debt. He bought everything." Ivy didn't hear the rest. The air left her lungs. He bought the debt. That meant the hospital bills, her mother's treatment, the thousands of dollars that kept her awake every night. He hadn't just cornered her physically. He had bought the very ground she stood on. She turned and ran. Panic is a funny thing. It makes you do stupid things. Instead of going to the car, Ivy burst out the back door into the alleyway. It was raining. Of course it was raining. The cold water soaked through her thin coat in seconds, plastering her hair to her face. She sprinted past the overflowing dumpsters, her boots splashing in puddles of oil and mud. She needed to get to the subway. She needed to disappear. She turned the corner onto the main street, gasping for air, her lungs burning. She made it 10 steps. Screech. The black SUV swerved across the wet asphalt, cutting off her path. The tires hissed on the wet road. Ivy skidded to a stop, almost slipping. She turned to run the other way. Another car blocked the retreat. She was trapped on the sidewalk. People walked by, heads down, ignoring the scene. In New York, you don't look at the black cars. You don't ask questions. The rear door of the first SUV opened. It didn't fly open aggressively. It opened slowly, smoothly. A man stepped out holding a large black umbrella. It wasn't Jack's. It was a mountain of a man with a scarred face. His bodyguard. "Get in the car, Ms. Miller," the bodyguard said. His voice was gravel, but not unkind. "It's warm inside." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Ivy shouted over the rain. "I'll scream." The bodyguard sighed, as if he dealt with runaway dancers every Tuesday. He stepped aside, and then Ivy saw him, sitting in the back seat, bathed in the soft blue light of the car's interior, was Jax Blackwood. He was wearing a charcoal suit today, impeccable, dry. He looked like a king watching a peasant drown in the mud. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at her, his eyes locked onto hers through the rain. He tapped the seat beside him. Once. A simple gesture. "Come here." Ivy stood in the rain, shivering violently. Her pride told her to run. Her survival instinct told her he owned the police, the streets, and now, her debts. If she ran, her mother would lose her treatment tomorrow. Defeated, she lowered her head. She walked to the car. She climbed inside. The door shut with a solid, expensive thud, cutting off the noise of the rain and the city. The silence inside was absolute. It smelled of leather, cedarwood, and him. Ivy huddled against the door, dripping water onto the pristine floor mats. She felt small, dirty. Jax didn't move. He didn't offer her a towel. He just watched her. "Why?" Ivy whispered, her teeth chattering. "Why me? There are 1,000 dancers in this city, 1,000 cleaners. Why are you doing this?" Jax leaned forward. The movement was fluid, predatory. He reached out. Ivy flinched, pressing her back into the leather. But he didn't strike her. He reached past her and turned on the seat heater. Then, his hand lingered near her face. He didn't touch her skin. He traced the line of her jaw in the air, an inch away. The heat from his hand radiated against her cold, wet cheek. "Because you are the only thing in this city that feels real," he said softly. His voice wrapped around her, dark and intoxicating. "Last night, you brought life into a dead room. I want that life. I want to keep it." "You can't keep a person," Ivy snapped, finding a spark of courage in her fear. "That's slavery." "I don't want a slave, Ivy." He finally touched her. His thumb brushed away a raindrop from her lower lip. His skin was rough, calloused, shocking against her cold mouth. Her breath hitched. The contact sent a jolt of electricity straight to her stomach. "I want to muse," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You will live in my house. You will have everything you need. Your mother will have the best doctors in the country." Ivy's heart stopped. He knew about her mother. Of course he knew. "And in return?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you want in return?" Jax leaned back, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a hungry one. "You dance for me, every night, until I say stop." He paused, letting the weight of the deal settle. "And Ivy, you never ever look at another man the way you looked at the darkness last night." He tapped the glass partition. "Drive." The car surged forward, merging into the traffic. Ivy looked out the window as her old life disappeared in the rearview mirror. She was warm now. The seat was heating up. Her debts were gone. But as she looked at the reflection of Jax Blackwood in the dark glass, seeing him watch her with that possessive, intense hunger, she realized the truth. She hadn't been rescued. She had been captured. And the terrifying part? Deep down, in the secret place where her music lived, she didn't want to open the door and run. The elevator ride was silent. It was a glass box rising through the spine of the city, lifting them high above the noise, the grime, and the rules of ordinary people. Ivy stood in the corner, her wet clothes clinging to her skin like a second freezing layer. A puddle of rainwater formed around her boots on the polished floor. She watched the numbers climb. 30, 40, 50, penthouse. Ding. The doors slid open. There was no hallway. The elevator opened directly into a living room that was larger than the entire building Ivy grew up in. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the space, offering a 360-degree view of the storm raging over Manhattan. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark, white bursts. It was beautiful, and it was terrifyingly cold. Not in temperature, the air was perfectly warm, but in spirit. The furniture was sharp, black leather, chrome and glass. No photos, no flowers, no life. It was a mausoleum for a living man. "Welcome home," Jack said. He stepped out, loosening his tie with a sharp tug. He threw his suit jacket onto a couch without looking. Ivy didn't move. She stayed in the elevator, clutching her arms. "Come in, Ivy. The elevator won't go down without my fingerprint. You are stuck." She swallowed the lump in her throat and stepped onto the dark hardwood floor. Her boots squeaked. She felt like a muddy, stray dog brought into a museum. "I'm wet," she whispered, looking down at the expensive rug. "I'm ruining your floor." Jax turned. He looked at the floor, then at her. He walked over to a small bar in the corner and poured a glass of amber liquid. He didn't drink it. He just held it, the crystal catching the light. "Floors can be replaced," he said, his voice low. "You cannot." He walked toward her. Ivy instinctively stepped back, but hit the wall near the entrance. Jack stopped inches from her. He smelled of rain and cedarwood. The heat radiating from his body was overwhelming. He reached out. Ivy held her breath. His hand moved to her coat. His fingers brushed her neck, a touch so light it felt like a burn, and he unzipped the sodden fabric. "You're shivering," he noted. Not a question, an observation. "I'm fine," she lied. Liar. He peeled the wet coat off her shoulders and let it drop to the floor. Thump. He didn't stop there. His eyes roamed over her oversized gray jumpsuit, the uniform of the invisible. "Take it off." Ivy's eyes widened. "What?" "No. I'm not doing that." Jax's expression didn't change. No anger, just a calm, terrifying patience. "I have clothes prepared for you in the bedroom. Dry clothes, warm clothes. I don't want you getting sick. Sick dancers don't perform well." He leaned in closer, trapping her with his arms against the wall. He wasn't touching her, but he was everywhere. "Or did you think I brought you here for something else?" His dark eyes dropped to her mouth. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Ivy felt a flush of heat rise up her neck, betraying her. Jack saw it. A smirk, sharp and dangerous, cut across his face. "Go change, Ivy. Second door on the left." He pulled back, releasing her from his gravity. "And Ivy, leave the door unlocked. In my house, there are no secrets." Ivy ran. She bolted for the hallway, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The bedroom was huge. The bed was big enough for 4 people. On the mattress, laid out like a gift, was a dress. Not a uniform. It was a slip dress made of black silk. Simple, elegant, and terrifyingly intimate. She stripped off her wet clothes, her hands shaking. She pulled on the silk. It felt like water against her skin. It fit perfectly. Too perfectly. He knew her size. He had watched her that closely. She walked back out into the living room, feeling exposed, feeling vulnerable. Jax was standing by the window, looking out at the storm. He had turned on the music. The same song. Wicked Game. But this time, it was playing through a sound system that made the bass vibrate in the floorboards. He turned around. His eyes swept over her, drinking her in. The silk clung to her curves, revealing the woman beneath the janitor. He took a sip of his drink, his gaze darkening. "Come here," he commanded. Ivy walked forward. Her legs felt heavy. She stopped in the center of the room, on the vast expanse of empty floor. "Dance," he said. "Now?" Ivy asked, her voice trembling. "Now. I can't just turn it on. It's not a switch." Jack set the glass down. Clink. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate steps. "Find the switch, Ivy, because you are not leaving this spot until I see the girl from last night." He circled her. A shark circling prey. He stood behind her, close enough that she could feel his chest against her back. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "Show me your pain, Ivy. Show me why you're broken." He whispered the words like a dark prayer. "Dance for your mother's life. Dance for your freedom. Or dance. Because for the first time in your life, someone is actually looking at you." A tear slipped down Ivy's cheek. She closed her eyes. She felt the anger rise, the frustration, the confusing, hot pull she felt toward this monster who had bought her. She snapped. She threw her arms out, spinning away from him. She didn't dance gracefully. She danced furiously. She stomped the ground, twisted her body, threw herself into the air with a desperate, savage energy. The silk dress flew around her like black smoke. She spun and spun, faster and faster, trying to outrun the cage, trying to outrun him. But every time she turned, he was there, watching, his eyes burning a hole through her defenses. She ended the dance on her knees, chest heaving, sliding across the floor to stop right at his feet. She looked up, panting, hair wild, eyes blazing with defiance. Jax looked down at her. He didn't applaud. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver coin. He crouched down, balancing on the balls of his feet, so they were face to face. He reached out and tucked a strand of sweat-damp hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her neck, his thumb resting on her racing pulse. "Good," he whispered. He pressed the cold silver coin into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "You are mine now, Ivy. And the scary part?" He leaned in, his lips hovering millimeters from hers. "I think you like the cage." The screen fades to black as the storm rages outside, sealing them in together. Waking up felt like surfacing from deep water. Ivy gasped, sitting up straight. Her heart was already racing, anticipating the alarm clock, the rush to catch the bus, the fear of being late. But there was no alarm. There was no bus. And the sheets tangled around her legs weren't her scratchy polyester ones. They were Egyptian cotton. Cool, smooth, expensive. She froze, the memories of the night before crashing down on her like a landslide. The rain, the SUV, the dance. "You are mine now." She looked around the room. It was flooded with aggressive morning light. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a piercing, innocent blue. It felt like a lie. Ivy slid out of the massive bed. She was still wearing the black silk slip. It felt like a second skin now. A constant reminder of who bought it. Who bought her. She walked to the door, hesitating. Her hand hovered over the cold metal handle. "Leave the door unlocked," he had said. She turned the handle. It opened silently. The penthouse was quiet. Not the empty quiet of an abandoned house, but the heavy, expectant quiet of a predator waiting in the grass. She walked into the living room. The smell hit her first. Coffee. Dark, rich, and bitter. And something else. Bacon? It was such a domestic smell. It clashed violently with the prison she was in. In the kitchen area, a sleek wall of black marble and chrome, Jax was standing. He wasn't wearing the suit armor from yesterday. He was wearing dark gray sweatpants and a tight black t-shirt that strained against the muscles of his back. He was cooking. The king of New York's underworld was flipping eggs in a frying pan. Ivy stopped, hugging her arms around herself. Jax didn't turn around. "Sit down, Ivy." She flinched. How did he know? She hadn't made a sound. "I'm not hungry," she said, her voice raspy from sleep. "I didn't ask if you were hungry. I told you to sit." Ivy glared at his back, a spark of rebellion igniting in her chest. She walked to the kitchen island but didn't sit. She stood behind one of the high stools. "Where are my clothes?" "My real clothes?" Jax turned then. He held a plate of food. He set it down on the counter with a deliberate clack. Burned. What? I burned them. They were wet. They smelled like poverty and bad detergent. He picked up a mug of coffee and took a slow sip, his eyes locking onto hers over the rim. You don't need them anymore. Ivy griped the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. You had no right. Those were... I had a photo in that pocket. A photo of my dad. Jack set the mug down. The casual atmosphere evaporated instantly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He walked around the island. Ivy didn't retreat this time. She was too angry. Jack stopped right in front of her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was the photo. Dried, slightly wrinkled, but safe. I'm a monster, Ivy, not a savage. He placed the photo on the counter between them. I kept what mattered. I destroyed the rest. That is how I run my business. And that is how I will run you. He slid a sleek, brand-new smartphone across the counter toward her. Your old phone is gone. This is your new one. It has one number saved in it. Mine. You can call your mother. You can call the doctors. But if you try to call anyone else... If you try to run... He leaned in, bracing his hands on the counter, trapping her with his gaze. The GPS in that phone will tell me exactly where you are. And Briggs, my head of security, will be there 5 minutes later. Do you understand? Ivy looked at the phone. It was the latest model. It looked like a sleek black brick, a shackle made of glass and microchips. She looked up at him. Why are you doing this? Is it just a game to you? A bored billionaire playing with a doll? Jax's jaw tightened. A flash of something dark passed through his eyes. Something that looked like pain, but vanished too quickly to be sure. You think this is a game? He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Out there, Ivy, you were drowning. You were working 2 jobs, starving yourself, and your mother was dying because the insurance company denied her claim. I checked your file. Ivy felt the blood drain from her face. I didn't just buy your debt, Ivy. I approved the surgery. The specialist from Zurich is flying in tomorrow. He picked up his fork and pointed at the plate of eggs. So, you are going to eat that breakfast. You are going to get your strength back, because you belong to me. And I take care of my property. Ivy stared at him, stunned silence filling the room. He saved her mother. He kidnapped her, threatened her, burned her clothes, and saved the only person she loved. Her brain couldn't process the contradiction. The villain was the hero. The hero was the jailer. She slowly sat down on the stool. She picked up the fork. Her hand trembled. She took a bite. It tasted like ash in her mouth, but she swallowed. Jax watched her take the bite. His shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. Good girl. He grabbed a black suit jacket from the back of a chair and put it on. The transformation was instant. The domestic cook vanished. The ruthless Dawn returned. I have to go to the docks. There is a... situation. He adjusted his cufflinks. Briggs is outside the door. He won't come in unless you scream. Or unless you try to leave. Don't try the windows. They are reinforced glass. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button. Then, he paused. He didn't look back. Practice dancing today, Ivy. The elevator doors opened. Tonight, I need you to be perfect. I'm bringing guests. Guests? Ivy choked out. Jax stepped into the elevator. He turned to face her as the doors began to slide shut. Not guests, wolves. And I need something beautiful to distract them while I sharpen my knife. The doors closed. Ivy was alone in the silence again. But this time, the silence was broken by the buzzing of the black phone on the counter. A message. From him. Text. Eat it all. The dress was red. Not the bright, cheerful red of a candy apple. It was deep, dark crimson, the color of oxygenated blood. The color of a warning sign. Ivy stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master bedroom. The silk fabric poured over her body like liquid fire, clinging to her hips, leaving her back completely bare. It was beautiful. and it made her want to vomit. She ran her hands over the fabric. Her fingers were trembling. He had chosen this. He had laid it out on the bed with a note that simply said, "Wear this. Don't be late." From the living room, a sound drifted in. Ding. The elevator. Voices. Low, rough, masculine voices that scraped against the silence of the penthouse. Ivy's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Wolves," he had said. She took a deep breath, trying to fill her lungs, but the dress was tight. She smoothed her hair, which she had pulled back into a severe, elegant bun. She looked like a trophy. She looked like exactly what she was. Property. She opened the door. The living room had changed. The lights were dimmed, casting long, sharp shadows across the furniture. The storm outside had cleared, leaving a backdrop of a million city lights. But the air inside was thick with cigar smoke and tension. Jax was standing by the bar. He looked devastating. He had traded the gray t-shirt for a black bespoke suit that fit his broad shoulders like armor. He was holding a crystal tumbler of whiskey, looking relaxed. But Ivy saw his hand. The knuckles were white. He was coiled, ready to strike. Opposite him sat 3 men on the leather sofas. They didn't look like businessmen. They looked like predators trying to wear human clothes. One had a scar running through his eyebrow. Another was cleaning his fingernails with a small knife. The third man, the leader, was older. Heavy, with eyes that looked wet and greedy. Jax looked up. His eyes found Ivy in the doorway. For a second, his mask slipped. His gaze dragged over the red dress, darkening, heating up. He looked possessive, intense. Then, the mask was back. "Gentlemen," Jax said, his voice smooth and cold. "We can discuss the territory borders in a moment. But first, I'd like you to meet my new acquisition." Acquisition. The word hit Ivy like a slap. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from flinching. She walked forward. Her legs felt like jelly, but years of ballet training took over. She glided across the floor, head high, hiding the terror. The 3 men turned. The silence that followed was disgusting. It was the silence of hungry dogs spotting a steak. "Well, well," the older man grunted, shifting his heavy weight on the sofa. "Jax, you've been holding out on us. Where did you find this little bird?" "I found her in the ashes," Jax replied, taking a sip of his drink. "Ivy, come here." It was a command. Ivy walked to him. She didn't want to go near the men on the sofa. Jax was the safest place in the room, and that realization terrified her. She stopped beside him. Jax didn't look at her. He reached out and placed his hand on the bare skin of her lower back. His palm was hot, rough. His fingers splayed out, claiming her, branding her. The heat from his hand seeped into her bones, steadying her shaking. "Pour Mr. Russo a drink, Ivy," Jax said softly. Ivy looked at the bottle of scotch on the table. It was right in front of the older man. Russo. She had to step away from Jax. She had to go into the circle of wolves. She swallowed hard. She stepped away from Jax's touch. The cold air hit her back instantly. She walked to the table. She could feel 6 eyes burning into her skin. She reached for the bottle. Her hand shook, just a little. Clink. The bottle hit the glass. "You have pretty hands," Russo said. His voice sounded like gravel in a blender. He reached out. His thick, sweaty fingers wrapped around Ivy's wrist. Ivy gasped, freezing. The touch was repulsive. She tried to pull back, but his grip tightened. "Why don't you sit here, sweetheart?" Russo smirked, showing yellow teeth. "The grown-ups are talking, but I like a soft cushion." Panic exploded in Ivy's chest. She looked back at Jax. Jax hadn't moved. He was still leaning against the bar, swirling his drink. But the air in the room had changed. It had gone from tense to vacuum-sealed. The other 2 men stopped moving. They sensed it too. "Let her go, Russo," Jax said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He sounded bored. but it was the boredom of an executioner. Russo laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "Come on, Jax. We're partners. You share the ports, you share the profits, you share the girl. That's the rule." Jax set his glass down. Slowly. He walked toward them. His footsteps were silent on the rug. "There are new rules," Jax said. He stopped right behind Ivy. He towered over Russo. He reached over Ivy's shoulder and placed his hand over Russo's hand, the one holding her wrist. Jax squeezed. Russo's smile faltered. Then it vanished. Then he grimaced. We heard the sickening crunch of cartilage grinding together. Russo yelped, releasing Ivy. Jax didn't let go of him. He leaned down, his face inches from Russo's sweating forehead. "I share the ports because it's business," Jax whispered. The menace in his voice was absolute. "But if you ever touch her again, if you even look at her with those pig eyes, I will cut your hands off and feed them to you." He released Russo's hand. The older man cradled it, whimpering, terrified. Jax wrapped his arm around Ivy's waist and pulled her back against his chest. A wall of solid muscle. A shield. "She is not business, Russo. She is mine." Jax looked at the other two men. Anyone else confused about the ownership? Silence. The men shook their heads quickly, looking at the floor. "Good," Jax said. "Now, get out of my house. The meeting is over." "But the shipment," Russo stammered. "Get out." The men scrambled. They grabbed their coats and rushed to the elevator like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Jax waited until the doors slid shut. As soon as they were gone, the strength left Ivy's legs. She swayed. Jax caught her. He spun her around. His hands gripped her shoulders hard. "Did he hurt you?" he demanded. His eyes were wild, scanning her wrist where a red mark was forming. I'm fine," Ivy whispered, breathless. Jax cursed under his breath. He lifted her wrist to his mouth. Ivy expected him to kiss it. He didn't. He blew cool air onto the red skin, his eyes furious. "I should have killed him," Jax growled. Ivy looked at him. Really looked at him. He was a criminal. He was dangerous. He had just crushed a man's hand without blinking. But he was shaking. He was shaking because someone had touched her. "Thank you," she whispered. Jax stopped. He looked into her eyes. The anger slowly faded, replaced by that dark, hungry intensity. "Don't thank me, Ivy." He pulled her closer, until her hips bumped against his. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because I don't like other people touching my things." He was lying. Ivy could see it in his eyes. It wasn't just possession. It was something else. And that terrified her more than Russo ever could. "Go to your room," Jax said roughly, releasing her. "Lock the door." "Why?" Ivy asked. "Because the wolves are gone," Jax said, turning away to pour himself another drink, his hand unsteady. "But the monster is still here, and he is still very hungry." The lock on the bedroom door clicked. Ivy stared at the silver knob. She had done exactly what he said. She had locked herself in. But the lock felt flimsy. It wasn't designed to keep monsters out. It was a symbol. A polite lie. She lay in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling. The adrenaline from the encounter with Russo had faded, leaving behind a cold, shaking exhaustion. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Jax's hand on her back. The heat. The possession. "She is mine." The penthouse was silent. Or it should have been. But Ivy heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, rhythmic footsteps pacing back and forth in the living room. It had been hours. It was 3 a.m. He was still awake. Ivy tossed the expensive duvet aside. Her curiosity was a dangerous thing, sharper than her fear. She walked to the door. She unlocked it. Click. She opened it just a crack. The living room was dark, lit only by the blue glow of the city grid outside. Jax was there. He had discarded his jacket. His shirt was unbuttoned halfway, revealing a chest that looked like it was carved from granite. He was holding a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly. He wasn't pacing anymore. He was sitting on the edge of the sofa, head in his hands, fingers digging into his scalp. He looked like a man in agony. He looked human. Ivy stepped out. Her bare feet made no sound on the rug. "Jax?" she whispered. His head snapped up. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. For a second, he looked confused, as if he didn't know where he was. Then, the focus returned. The walls went up. "I told you to lock the door," he rasped. His voice was a wreck, like grinding stones. "I heard you," Ivy said, stopping a safe distance away. "You're pacing, like a caged animal." Jax let out a bitter laugh. He rubbed his face aggressively. "Go back to bed, Ivy. The show is over. You can't sleep, can you?" she asked softly. Jax stared at the glass in his hand. "Sleep is a luxury I can't afford. The ghosts get too loud when I close my eyes." Ivy looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. The power, the money, the fear he commanded. None of it could buy him peace. Suddenly, he didn't look like the devil who bought her debt. He looked like a man drowning. And Ivy, despite everything, despite the kidnapping, the threats, the fear, felt a pull. It was the empathy. The cursed empathy that made her care about broken things. She walked over to the stereo system on the wall. Jax watched her, tense, ready to snap. "What are you doing?" Ivy didn't answer. She pressed a button. Music filled the room. It wasn't the dark, heavy bass of Wicked Game. It was something else. A classical piece. Piano. Clair de Lune. Soft. Melancholic. Like moonlight turned into sound. She walked to the center of the room. The red dress was gone. She was wearing the silk slip again. She didn't look at him. She closed her eyes. "I'm not dancing for you," she whispered to the empty air. "I'm dancing for the ghosts, to make them quiet." She began to move. It wasn't the angry, sharp dance of the first night. It was fluid, slow. She extended her arms, her body swaying like a willow branch in a gentle wind. She spun, but slowly, controlling every muscle, painting the air with her movements. Jax didn't speak. He sat frozen on the couch. He watched her. But this time, it wasn't the hungry look of a predator. It was the desperate look of a man seeing a lighthouse in a storm. Ivy focused on the music. She let the piano notes guide her feet. She danced the silence. She danced the peace that he couldn't find. Round and round she went, a pale spirit in the blue dark. Minutes passed. The song ended. Ivy stopped, breathing softly, her hand resting over her heart. She opened her eyes, expecting a sarcastic comment, expecting him to demand more. But the room was silent. Jax hadn't moved. He was still sitting on the couch, leaning back against the cushions. His eyes were closed. His breathing was deep, even, slow. He was asleep. For the first time in days, the tension had left his body. His face looked younger, softer without the scowl. His hand rested loosely on his knee. Ivy stood there, stunned. He had threatened to hunt her. He had crushed a man's hand for her. But all he really needed was a lullaby. She walked closer, stepping carefully. She reached out, hesitating, then grabbed a cashmere blanket that was draped over the armchair. She moved toward him. The risk was insane. If he woke up, he might snap her neck before realizing who it was. But she didn't stop. She gently draped the blanket over the sleeping king of New York. Jax stirred. He mumbled something unintelligible, turning his head into the cushion, seeking the warmth. But he didn't wake up. Ivy stepped back. She looked at him one last time. "Good night, Jax," she whispered. She turned and walked back to her bedroom. This time, when she closed the door, she didn't lock it. She knew, with a strange certainty, that the monster wouldn't attack tonight. Tonight, the monster was resting, and she was the one who had tamed him. Sunlight hit Jax's face like a physical blow. He flinched, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun he usually kept under his pillow. But his hand hit soft cashmere instead. He froze. He wasn't in his bed. He was on the couch. He blinked, his brain rebooting, fighting through a fog he hadn't felt in years. Sleep. Real, deep, dreamless sleep. He sat up abruptly. The gray cashmere blanket pooled around his waist. He stared at it. He remembered the music, the piano, the girl spinning in the blue light. And then, darkness. He checked his watch. 10:00 a.m. He had slept for 7 hours, in the open, vulnerable. Anyone could have walked in. Anyone could have put a bullet in his head. A surge of cold anger washed over him. Not at Ivy, but at himself. Weakness was a death sentence in his world, and last night he had been weak. He threw the blanket aside as if it were infected. He stood up, his muscles stiff, his shirt wrinkled. He needed coffee. He needed a weapon. He needed to remind himself who was the predator and who was the prey. He walked to the kitchen. She was there. Ivy was sitting on one of the bar stools, staring out at the city view. She was wearing one of his spare white button-down shirts. It swallowed her small frame, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, the hem reaching her knees. She looked comfortable. She heard him. She turned. "Good morning," she said softly. Jax didn't answer. He stalked toward her, the predator back in control. He stopped on the other side of the island, gripping the marble edge until his knuckles turned white. "What did you do to me?" he demanded. His voice was rough, dangerous. Ivy put down her mug. She didn't look scared. She looked calm. "I covered you with a blanket, Jax. I didn't stab you." "You drugged the water," he accused, narrowing his eyes. "I don't sleep. I never sleep like that." "I danced," Ivy corrected him. "You were tired. You let go. Don't make it sound like a crime." Jax walked around the island. Ivy stayed still. She didn't flinch this time. She watched him come closer, her chin lifted in that defiant way that drove him crazy. He stopped inches from her stool. He placed his hands on the counter on either side of her, trapping her. He leaned down, his face close to hers. He could smell soap and her. "Don't mistake my exhaustion for kindness, Ivy," he warned, his voice a low growl. "And don't ever think you can catch me off guard again. If you had tried to leave last night—" "I didn't try to leave," she interrupted, holding his gaze. "The door was unlocked. I checked." Jax paused. The information hit him. She could have run. He was unconscious. She could have taken the elevator, run to the police, disappeared. But she stayed. "Why?" he whispered. The anger drained away, replaced by genuine confusion. "Why are you still here?" Ivy looked down at her hands. She twisted the fabric of his shirt. "Because of the wolves," she said quietly. She looked back up at him. "And because, when you sleep, you don't look like you want to hurt the world. You just look lonely." Jax felt like he had been punched in the gut. He pushed himself back, retreating from her. He couldn't handle the empathy. He could handle fear, hate, lust. But pity? Understanding? That was dangerous. He turned his back to her, running a hand through his messy hair. "Get dressed," he ordered, his voice flat. Not the red dress. Something practical. Ivy frowned. "Why? Where are we going?" Jax turned back. The mask was back in place. The cold, calculated businessman. "We are going to the hospital, Ivy." Ivy stood up, the stool scraping against the floor. "My mother, is she... Did something happen?" "The specialist arrived this morning," Jax said. "He is examining her now. I thought you might want to be there." Ivy stared at him. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was doing it again. Whiplash. One minute he was threatening her, the next he was giving her the one thing she wanted most in the world. "Thank you," she breathed. "Don't thank me," Jax snapped. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button. He looked at her reflection in the metal doors. I'm not doing it for you. A distracted dancer is a sloppy dancer. I need you focused." He was lying again. Ivy smiled, a small, sad smile. "Okay, Jax, whatever you say." The elevator chimed. As they stepped in, Jax made sure not to touch her. Because he knew, with terrifying clarity, that if he touched her now, after she had seen him broken and still stayed, he might never want to let her go. And for a man like him, falling in love wasn't a fairy tale. It was a weakness that his enemies would use to destroy them both. Hospitals usually smell like fear and cheap antiseptic. But the private wing of St. Jude's Hospital smelled of fresh lilies and lemon wax. Ivy walked down the corridor, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished linoleum. Jax walked beside her. He didn't make a sound. He moved like a shadow in a bespoke suit, his eyes scanning every corner, every nurse, every open door. He wasn't visiting. He was patrolling. They stopped at room 402. Ivy's hand hovered over the door handle. She couldn't breathe. She looked at Jax. "Go in," he said. His voice was low, devoid of the harshness from earlier. Ivy pushed the door open. The room was spacious, bathed in soft afternoon light. And there, in the center of the bed, propped up by pillows, was her mother. She wasn't pale and gasping like the last time Ivy saw her. She was sleeping peacefully. A monitor beeped rhythmically, a steady, strong sound of life. Ivy covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a sob. She rushed to the bedside. She touched her mother's hand. It was warm. "Mom?" she whispered. Her mother stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open. "Ivy?" Her voice was weak but clear. "Oh, honey, you're here." Ivy collapsed into the chair, burying her face in her mother's blanket. The relief was a physical weight lifting off her shoulders, leaving her lightheaded. They talked. Small whispered words about doctors, about pain fading, about hope. Jax didn't enter the room. He stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed over his chest. He watched the scene with an unreadable expression. He saw the way Ivy held her mother's hand. He saw the pure, unadulterated love in her eyes. It was a language he didn't speak. He dealt in transactions, leverage, and debt. This was foreign. Ivy looked up, catching his eye. She stood up and walked to the door, leaving her mother resting. She stepped into the hallway, closing the door softly behind her. She looked up at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, shining with tears. She looks alive," Ivy said, her voice trembling. "The doctor said the surgery is scheduled for Tuesday. He said she has an 80% chance." Jax nodded once. "I pay for the best. I expect results." Ivy took a step closer. The gap between them felt charged with static electricity. She reached out. For the first time, she initiated the touch. She placed her hand on his forearm. Her fingers were small against the dark fabric of his suit. "You saved her," she whispered. "You kidnapped me. You threatened me. You own me. But you saved her." Jax looked down at her hand. He stared at it as if it were a burning coal. He should pull away. He should tell her it was just a purchase. But he didn't. His muscle twitched under her touch. "It was part of the deal, Ivy." "No." Ivy shook her head. "You could have put her in a general ward. You put her here. There are flowers in the room, Jax. You bought lilies." Jax looked away, jaw clenching. "I hate empty rooms." Ivy laughed. A short, watery sound. "You're a terrible liar." She looked at him with something that wasn't fear anymore. It was curiosity. It was gratitude mixed with confusion. "Who are you, Jax Blackwood?" Jax pulled his arm away abruptly, breaking the contact. The warmth of her hand lingered on his skin, irritating him. "I am the man who owns your debt," he said harshly, rebuilding the wall between them. "Don't romanticize me, Ivy. I'm not a hero. I'm an investor protecting his asset." He checked his watch, avoiding her eyes. "We have to go." "It's not safe to stay in one place for too long." Ivy nodded, wiping her face. The moment was gone, shattered by his coldness. But as they walked back to the elevator, she walked a little closer to him than before. They reached the lobby. The glass doors opened to the street. Suddenly, Jack stopped. His hand shot out, grabbing Ivy's arm, yanking her behind him. "Stay back," he hissed. Ivy stumbled, hitting his back. She peered around his shoulder. Across the street, parked 2 cars down from his SUV, was a gray sedan. It looked normal to her. But to Jax, it screamed danger. Tinted windows, engine running, no license plate on the front. "Get back inside," Jax ordered, his voice commanding, leaving no room for argument. Before Ivy could move, the window of the gray sedan rolled down. A flash of metal. Jax didn't think. He reacted. He spun around, grabbing Ivy and throwing her to the ground, covering her body with his own. Crack. The sound wasn't like a movie. It was a sharp, dry pop. The glass of the hospital revolving door shattered above them, raining shards down like deadly diamonds. Screams erupted in the lobby. Jax pressed Ivy into the cold floor tiles. He was heavy, solid, warm. He lifted his head, scanning the street. The gray sedan screeched away, tires smoking. Ivy was shaking beneath him. "Jax?" she gasped. Jax looked down. His eyes were black pits of fury, but his hands were gently cupping her head, protecting her from the glass. "Are you hit?" he demanded, scanning her body frantically. "Ivy, answer me." No, I'm fine," she stammered. Jax let out a breath that sounded like a growl. He stood up and pulled her to her feet in one fluid motion. He didn't let go of her hand. His grip was bruising. "We are leaving, now." He dragged her toward the SUV, flanked by his security team who had appeared out of nowhere. Ivy looked at his back. She saw a small tear in his expensive suit jacket, right near the shoulder. And underneath, a dark stain was spreading. "Jax," she whispered, horror choking her. "You're bleeding." Jax didn't stop walking. He shoved her into the back seat of the armored car and climbed in after her. "Drive!" he roared at the driver. He slumped back against the leather seat, his hand pressing against his shoulder. Blood was seeping through his fingers. He looked at Ivy. She was pale, terrified. "Don't look," he groaned, closing his eyes. Ivy didn't look away. She moved. She crawled across the seat, ignoring his protests. She placed her hands over his, pressing down on the wound. "You idiot," she cried, tears streaming down her face again. "You jumped in front of me." Jax opened his eyes. They were hazy with pain, but the intensity was still there. "You're my property, Ivy," he rasped, a bloody smile touching his lips. Nobody breaks. The armored SUV tore through the streets of Manhattan like a bullet. Inside, the air smelled of copper and expensive leather. Ivy was on her knees on the floor of the car, squeezed between the seats. Her hands were pressed hard against Jax's shoulder. Warm, sticky blood seeped through her fingers. It was terrifyingly hot. Jax hissed through his teeth, his head thrown back against the headrest. His eyes were closed, sweat beading on his forehead, mixing with the grime of the explosion. He looked pale. The invincible king of New York looked mortal. "Press harder," he gritted out, his voice tight with pain. "I am," Ivy cried, her voice shaking. "We need a hospital. You need a doctor, Jax." "No hospitals," Jax snapped, opening his eyes. His gaze was hazy but fierce. That was a hit. "If I go to a public ER, the police come, then the press, then my enemies finish the job." He looked at the driver partition. "Take us home, Briggs. Call the private doc. Tell him to meet us there." Ivy watched the blood spread on his white shirt. It looked like a blooming flower of death. "Why?" she whispered again, the question tearing out of her throat. "Why did you jump? You could have pushed me. You could have run." Jax turned his head slowly to look at her. His hand, his good hand, reached out. He gripped her chin, smearing a streak of his own blood on her jawline. It looked like war paint. "I told you," he rasped. "You are my investment. Stop it," Ivy yelled. The fear made her bold. "Stop talking about money." "You took a bullet, Jax. That's not business. That's suicide." Jax stared at her. He saw the terror in her eyes. Not terror of him, but terror for him. His thumb brushed the blood off her cheek. The touch was surprisingly gentle for a man who was bleeding out. "If you die," he murmured, his voice fading slightly as the shock set in. "The music stops, and I don't want the silence to come back." The car swerved, taking a sharp turn. Ivy fell against his chest. She heard his heart beating. It was fast, erratic, but strong. She stayed there, her head resting near his good shoulder, her hand still stemming the flow of blood on the other side. For the rest of the drive, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with the things they couldn't say. Ivy realized, with a sinking feeling in her gut, that she wasn't just holding a wound closed. She was holding him together, and she didn't want to let go. The penthouse. 20 minutes later. The private elevator opened. Briggs and another security guard helped Jax into the living room. He was stumbling now, the adrenaline wearing off. "Get him to the sofa," Ivy ordered. She didn't wait for permission. She ran to the kitchen, grabbing clean towels and a bowl of water. She moved on instinct. The doctor arrived minutes later, a small, nervous man with a black bag. He worked quickly, cutting the shirt, cleaning the wound, stitching the skin. Ivy stood by the window, watching. She couldn't look away. She saw the scars on Jax's back. Old scars, knife wounds, burn marks, a roadmap of violence. He hadn't just become a monster. He had been carved into one. When the doctor finished, Jax refused the painkillers. "I need a clear head," he growled, sitting up. He was shirtless, a white bandage stark against his tanned skin. The doctor left. The security team retreated to the hallway. They were alone again. Jax poured himself a drink with his good hand. He downed it in one swallow. He looked at Ivy. She was still standing by the window. Her white shirt, his shirt, was stained with his blood. Her hands were red. "Come here," he said. Ivy didn't move. "You should rest." I said, "Come here." Ivy walked to him. She stopped between his spread knees. Jax reached out and took her hands. He looked at the red stains on her skin. His expression crumbled. The mask broke. "I got blood on you," he whispered. It sounded like an apology. Ivy looked down at their joined hands. The red mixed together. You couldn't tell whose blood was whose. "It washes off, Jax. Does it?" He looked up at her. His eyes were dark, haunted abysses. "My blood doesn't wash off, Ivy. It stains everything it touches." He squeezed her hands. "You should run. Right now. While I'm weak. Take the elevator. Go to the police. Get away from me." Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a test. Or maybe it was a moment of clarity. She looked at the door. Freedom. Then she looked at him. The bandage. The scars. The loneliness that radiated off him like heat. "If I run," she said softly, "who will change your bandages?" Jax froze. He pulled her closer until she was standing flush against the sofa. He pressed his forehead against her stomach. He let out a long, shuddering breath. "You are a fool, Ivy," he muttered into the fabric of her shirt. His arms wrapped around her waist, holding her tight, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. "I'm going to ruin you," he promised. Ivy rested her hand on his hair. Her fingers tangled in the dark strands. "Maybe," she whispered to the empty room. "Or maybe I'll save you." Aqui está o capítulo 10, o grande final deste primeiro arco. Este capítulo sela o destino deles. Não é apenas o fim do susto, é o momento em que a realidade da guerra cai sobre eles. O cliffhanger, gancho final, aqui é projetado para deixar o público desesperado pela temporada 2 ou pelo próximo vídeo. The bathroom mirror was steamed up. Ivy wiped it with a trembling hand, revealing her reflection. She looked different. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were wide, dark, and dilated. And although she had scrubbed her skin raw with soap, she could still feel the phantom warmth of Jax's blood on her hands. She wasn't the invisible cleaning lady anymore. She was the woman who had pressed her hands into a bullet wound to save a monster. She walked out of the bathroom. The penthouse was dim, the only light coming from the city glow outside. Jax was still on the sofa. He hadn't moved, but he wasn't relaxing. He was cleaning a gun. The metal parts clicked softly as he reassembled the weapon with one hand. His movements practiced, lethal, despite the bandage on his shoulder. He looked up when she entered. His eyes were cold again. The vulnerability from the car was gone, locked away behind a steel wall. "Come here," he said. Ivy walked to him. She didn't stop until her knees touched the coffee table. Are you going to kill someone?" she asked, looking at the black weapon. Jack slid the magazine into place with a sharp clack. "War is coming, Ivy. And in war, people die." He placed the gun on the table. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something else. A key. A heavy, old-fashioned iron key. "Sit," he commanded. Ivy sat on the edge of the coffee table, facing him. She was close enough to smell the antiseptic and the lingering scent of gunpowder. "Today changed everything," Jack said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "Before today, you were just a debt. An amusement. A pretty bird in a cage." He leaned forward, wincing slightly as his wound pulled. "But today I made a mistake." Ivy frowned. "A mistake?" "I jumped," Jax whispered. "In front of my men. In front of my enemies. I took a bullet for you." He looked deep into her eyes, searching for something. "Do you know what that tells them, Ivy?" Ivy shook her head slowly. "It tells them that I have a weakness." Jax reached out and touched her cheek. His thumb traced her lower lip. "It tells them that the invincible Jax Blackwood has a heart, and that heart is walking around outside of his chest." Ivy stopped breathing. The weight of his words crashed into her. He wasn't confessing love. He was confessing a tactical error. He was telling her that by saving her, he had painted a target on her back. "You are not safe anymore," he said. "Not even here. They will come for you to get to me. So let me go," Ivy whispered. "Let me disappear." Jax laughed. It was a dark, terrifying sound. "If I let you go, you'll be dead in an hour. They are watching the building right now." He pressed the heavy iron key into her hand. Her fingers curled around the cold metal. "This opens the safe in the bedroom closet," he explained. "Inside there is cash, passports, and a gun." He grabbed her hand, squeezing it hard. "If I ever tell you to run, you run to that safe. You take the gun. And you shoot anyone who isn't me. Do you understand?" Ivy looked at the key. It felt heavy. It felt like a promise. "I don't know how to shoot," she said weakly. "You will learn," Jax promised. "I will teach you." He stood up, towering over her. "You wanted to save me, Ivy? You put your hands on my wound?" He pulled her up to stand with him. "Congratulations. You're in the game now." Suddenly the elevator chimed. Ding. Ivy jumped. Jax didn't flinch. He just picked up the gun from the table. The door slid open. Briggs walked in. He looked pale. He was holding a phone. "Boss," Briggs said, his voice tight. "We found the driver of the gray sedan." Jax didn't look away from Ivy. "Who was it?" Briggs hesitated. "It wasn't the Russians, sir, and it wasn't the Italians." Jax finally turned. His eyes narrowed. "Then who?" Briggs swallowed hard. "The car is registered to Blackwood Holdings." He paused, letting the silence scream. "It was your brother, sir." Silas ordered the hit. The air in the room turned to ice. Jack stood perfectly still. His face became a mask of stone. Betrayal. The ultimate sin. His own blood wanted him dead. Jax looked back at Ivy. A dark, twisted smile touched his lips. It seems the family reunion is going to be messy. He walked to the window, looking out at the city that wanted to eat them alive. He beckoned Ivy to join him. She walked to his side. He wrapped his good arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He wasn't protecting her anymore. He was claiming her as his partner in the chaos. "Look at the view, Ivy," he whispered in her ear. "Before you were just the cleaning lady. But tonight," he kissed the side of her neck, a kiss that felt like a seal on a death warrant. "Tonight, you are the queen of a war zone." The camera pulls back, showing the two of them, the wounded monster and the dancer, standing silhouetted against the bright, dangerous lights of New York, as the screen fades to black.